Did you know Japan banned its own war films for decades? While Hollywood glorified Allied heroism, Japanese directors dared to expose their nation's darkest war crimes and paid the price. Some filmmakers received death threats from right-wing nationalists, while others saw their works banned in multiple countries. Let's explore the controversial masterpieces that forced Japan to confront its brutal imperial past. Number 15. The Eternal Zero, 2013. Japan's highest-grossing war film ever made nationalists and pacifists equally furious with its portrayal of kamikaze pilots as reluctant heroes. Based on a best-selling novel, it follows siblings discovering their grandfather was a Zero fighter pilot who supposedly volunteered for a suicide mission despite wanting to live. The film's explosive controversy stems from its sympathetic portrayal of men who died in Japan's most desperate act of war. Director Takashi Yamazaki faced death threats from both ultra-nationalists who considered the pilots sacred martyrs beyond criticism, and peace activists who accused him of whitewashing imperial aggression. The film's most stunning sequence features meticulously recreated aerial combat using both CGI and authentic Zero fighters borrowed from museums. South Korean theaters refused to show it, calling it glorification of war criminals, while China banned it outright. Critics worldwide were divided. The New York Times called it nationalist fantasy, dressed as family drama, while Japanese film scholar Tadao Sato defended it as necessary cultural reckoning. The real scandal? The film grossed over $90 million in Japan, despite protests outside theaters. Lead actor Junichi Okada spent 3 months living in Spartan conditions similar to wartime pilots, losing 22 pounds to achieve the gaunt look of malnourished servicemen. As director Yamazaki later admitted, "We weren't making a political statement. We were telling a human story that Japan still cannot agree on how to remember." Number 14. Pride. The Fateful Moment, 1998. Masato Harada created Japan's most politically explosive film by portraying war criminal Hideki Tojo as a misunderstood patriot railroaded by American victors' justice. Following Tojo through his wartime leadership and subsequent trial, the film suggests Japan fought a defensive war against Western colonialism, not an imperial conquest. Its title alone, Pride, caused diplomatic incidents across Asia. The film's most controversial scene shows Tojo calmly explaining Japan's noble intentions at his war crimes trial, while American judges appear vindictive and biased. China and South Korea immediately condemned the film as historical denialism, with Korean officials formally protesting to the Japanese government. Major theater chains in the US refused to screen it after veterans groups threatened boycotts. Japanese critics largely praised actor Masahiko Sugawa's nuanced performance while condemning the film's politics. The Japanese government distanced itself from the film while quietly allowing right-wing groups to organize youth screenings. The production faced constant protests, with director Harada receiving so many threats his studio hired bodyguards. Despite the controversy, or because of it, the film earned 2.1 billion yen. As historian Yuki Tanaka noted, this film revealed Japan's unresolved national trauma, unable to fully condemn or embrace its wartime leaders, leaving the country in perpetual historical limbo. Number 13. Merdeka 17805, 2001. Shunsuke Ono unleashed international fury with this alternate history drama, suggesting Japanese occupation improved Indonesia before cruel Dutch colonizers returned. Set during Indonesia's fight for independence, the film portrays Japanese soldiers helping Indonesians resist European powers. The title combines Merdeka, Indonesian for freedom, with 17,805, the Japanese military code for the Southeast Asian region. What ignited outrage was the complete, erasure of Japanese atrocities in Indonesia, where forced labor killed over 100,000 civilians. The most infamous scene shows grateful Indonesian villagers tearfully bidding farewell to departing Japanese soldiers, completely contradicting historical records of celebration when occupation ended. The Indonesian government banned the film, while Dutch diplomats filed formal complaints with Tokyo for fantasy portrayed as history. Japanese critics slammed the film's technical flaws, but largely ignored its historical revisionism. The production secretly filmed in the Philippines after Indonesian authorities revoked permits upon reading the script. Director Ono defended his approach, claiming, "We've only seen one narrative about Japan's wartime actions. I'm offering an alternative perspective." Historian Iyanaga Saburo countered, "This isn't perspective, it's dangerous mythology." The film bombed financially, but found second life when nationalist groups arranged school screenings, prompting Education Ministry investigations into its classroom use. Number 12. The Truth About Nanjing. 2007. Satoru Mizushima created the most internationally condemned Japanese film by explicitly denying the Nanjing massacre ever happened. This pseudo-documentary argues the 1937 atrocity, where Japanese forces killed hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians, was fabricated Allied propaganda. Funded entirely by right-wing organizations, the film presents experts claiming photos of massacres were staged or manipulated. The film's most disturbing segment features actors recreating the real Nanjing, showing Japanese soldiers helping Chinese citizens while suggesting Chinese soldiers committed the documented atrocities. China immediately banned not just the film, but all works by everyone involved. International historians united in unprecedented condemnation, with 57 leading scholars signing a joint statement calling the film deliberate falsification of evidence. The film never received traditional theatrical distribution, instead screening at nationalist events and via mail-order DVD. Director Mizushima admitted never visiting Nanjing nor interviewing survivors before making his documentary. Following international backlash, several Japanese investors removed their names from credits. As Columbia University professor Carol Gluck noted, "This film represents Japan's most extreme fringe, but its existence demonstrates how contested basic historical facts remain." Despite or because of its controversy, the film sold over 100,000 copies in Japan, primarily through nationalist organizations. Number 11. Caterpillar, 2010. Koji Wakamatsu delivered a visceral anti-war statement with his brutal portrayal of a disabled Japanese soldier returning from the front as a limbless war god dependent on well video, his wife's care. Set in 1940, the film shows how Lieutenant Kurokawa returns from the China front as a quadruple amputee, with burns covering his body, unable to speak a human caterpillar, worshipped by villagers while privately abusing his caretaker wife. What made censors worldwide uncomfortable was the film's unflinching portrayal of both wartime physical trauma and domestic violence, suggesting Japan's military aggression directly poisoned its home front. The film's most controversial sequence shows flashbacks of Kurokawa committing war crimes in China, including assault and murder of civilians. Connecting his personal violence to national militarism, Japanese nationalist groups called for a boycott, labeling Wakamatsu a traitor to national heroes. Critics were stunned by Shinobu Terajima's performance as the soldier's wife, which won Best Actress at the Berlin Film Festival despite right-wing protests. The film faced distribution problems in Japan, with theaters receiving threatening letters. Director Wakamatsu, a former radical leftist, commented, "Japan still worships its disabled veterans while ignoring what they did and saw. This silence allows militarism to return." The film grossed modestly in art houses worldwide, but became an underground success in China through pirated copies, where audiences viewed it as long overdue Japanese acknowledgement of war crimes. Number 10. The Human Condition Trilogy, 1959 to 1961. Masaki Kobayashi created the most ambitious anti-war statement in cinema history. With his 9.5-hour trilogy following Idealist, Kaji's transformation from labor camp supervisor to reluctant soldier to Soviet prisoner. Shot in stark black and white across 3 films, it systematically dismantles every justification for Japan's wartime behavior, while showing how ordinary citizens became complicit in atrocities. The most shocking aspect was its direct portrayal of Japanese brutality against Chinese laborers and prisoners, unprecedented in Japanese cinema. The trilogy's most controversial sequence shows Japanese officers ordering the execution of Chinese prisoners, with protagonist Kaji forced to participate scenes that prompted government demands for cuts, which Kobayashi refused. The films faced restricted distribution in Japan itself, while censors in American-occupied territories demanded modifications. Critics recognized it as a masterpiece, with Tatsuya Nakadai's performance as Kaji considered among cinema's greatest. The trilogy's grueling production mirrored its content. Filming in Hokkaido's freezing conditions caused multiple crew injuries and equipment failures. Kobayashi, himself a war veteran who had refused officer promotion on moral grounds, faced harassment from nationalist groups who called him anti-Japanese. As critic Tadao Sato observed, Kobayashi created Japan's first truly honest war film by showing not what the Japanese suffered, but what suffering the Japanese caused, a distinction still contested today. Despite limited release, the trilogy influenced generations of filmmakers worldwide, with Martin Scorsese calling it essential viewing for understanding war's moral corruption. Number 9. The Men of the Yamato, 2005. Junya Sato stirred international tensions with his romanticized portrayal of Japan's legendary battleship and its doomed final mission. Based on survivors' testimonies, the film follows the Yamato history's largest battleship on its one-way suicide mission against American forces at Okinawa, presenting its crew as tragic heroes rather than aggressors in a war Japan started. The film's most controversial aspect is its glorification of what historians consider a wasteful military operation that sacrificed 3,000 sailors for propaganda purposes. Chinese and Korean media condemned its portrayal of Imperial Navy officers as noble warriors instead of participants in a brutal colonial war. The film's spectacular sinking sequence cost $5 million alone, the most expensive single scene in Japanese film history at that time. Japanese audiences embraced it, making it 2005's highest-grossing domestic film with $42 million. Critics outside Japan were less impressed, with The Guardian calling it technically impressive but morally vacant. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force controversially provided technical support despite constitutional prohibitions against military involvement in media glorifying past wars. Director Sato defended his approach. These young men died following orders. Their personal courage deserves recognition separate from the politics. Historian John Dower countered, "This film represents Japan's ongoing struggle to separate the sacrifice of ordinary soldiers from the criminal policies of their leaders, a distinction victims of Japanese aggression find impossible to accept." Number 8. Fires on the Plain, 1959. Kon Ichikawa delivered Japanese cinema's most disturbing war film with his unflinching portrayal of Japanese soldiers resorting to cannibalism in the Philippines. Following tubercular Private Tamura, as his unit disintegrates during the American advance, the film shows soldiers reduced to hunting each other for meat in the jungle, a topic so taboo, the studio initially rejected the script. The film's most shocking scene explicitly shows soldiers butchering a dead comrade, with Tamura later realizing salt beef, offered to him as human flesh. Outraged veterans groups demanded the film be banned for dishonoring war dead, while government officials worried about international reactions to Japanese soldiers being portrayed as cannibals. American occupation authorities, still controlling aspects of Japanese media, nearly prevented its release. Critics recognized its artistic brilliance while acknowledging its difficult subject matter. The film won the Blue Ribbon Award for Best Film, despite being banned from export to several Asian countries still traumatized by Japanese occupation. Actor Eiji Funakoshi lost dangerous amounts of weight during production to authentically portray starvation. Director Ichikawa, criticized for unpatriotic filmmaking, responded, "If depicting the truth about war is unpatriotic, then patriotism itself has become a disease." The film remained restricted in parts of Asia for decades, with Philippines censors approving uncut screenings only in 1993, nearly 35 years after its release. Number 7. Under the Flag of the Rising Sun, 1972, Kinji Fukasaku shattered taboos by directly addressing Japanese war crimes through a widow's quest to clear her executed husband's name. The film follows Saki as she interviews her husband's former comrades, each telling different versions of events leading to his court-martial, gradually revealing atrocities committed by Japanese forces against civilians and their own soldiers. The film's most controversial technique was inserting actual war footage into fictional scenes, blurring documentary and drama in ways that made Japanese censors uncomfortable. Its most disturbing sequence shows Japanese officers ordering soldiers to kill and cannibalize Allied prisoners when food supplies fail. Government officials attempted to block its release, claiming it would damage Japan's international reputation and dishonor veterans. Critics praised its innovative structure and unflinching honesty. The film struggled financially in Japan, but found acclaim at international festivals. Actor Tetsuro Tamba later revealed receiving threatening letters from right-wing groups for participating. Director Fukasaku, whose later Battle Royale would cause different controversies, commented, "Japan built its economic miracle on collective amnesia about the war. My film asks what happens when memories return." Historian Yoshiaki Yoshimi noted, "This film was revolutionary in showing Japanese atrocities not as aberrations committed by a few, but as systemic failures of military culture, a perspective Japan still struggles to accept." Number 6. The Sea and Poison, 1986. Kei Kumai created international outrage with his clinical depiction of actual medical experiments performed on American POWs by Japanese doctors. Based on Shusaku Endo's novel, the film follows medical students and doctors at Kyushu University, who vivisected 8 captured American airmen in 1945 to study the effects of surgical procedures without anesthesia. A war crime most Japanese citizens knew nothing about until the film's release. The film's most horrifying scene shows doctors removing a conscious prisoner's lung while measuring how long he survives, depicted with documentary-like detachment. American veterans groups protested screenings, while Japanese medical associations condemned the film as anti-scientific, despite its basis in documented war crimes. Several theaters canceled showings after receiving threats from nationalist organizations. Critics worldwide recognized its importance while acknowledging its difficult subject matter. The film won the Silver Bear at the Berlin Film Festival, despite Japanese government attempts to block its submission. Actor Kyusaku Shimada reported being ostracized by colleagues for portraying the lead doctor. Director Kumai faced constant criticism that he was shaming Japan, to which he responded, "Medical ethics that permit atrocities during wartime will permit them during peacetime. Japan must confront this history." The film was never broadcast on Japanese television and remains difficult to find, with Professor Takashi Yoshida noting, Its virtual disappearance from circulation demonstrates Japan's ongoing discomfort with directly confronting specific war crimes. Number 5. The Emperor in August, 2015. Masato Harada ignited controversy by humanizing Emperor Hirohito during Japan's surrender, suggesting he actively sought peace against military hardliners. Following the intense internal struggles during the final weeks before Japan's surrender, the film portrays Hirohito as a reluctant figurehead, trapped between fanatics, willing to sacrifice millions, and his desire to end the war. A portrayal that contradicts both traditional Japanese reverence and international views of his war responsibility. The film's most contentious scene shows Hirohito directly challenging military leaders who plan continuing the war despite atomic bombings. An assertion of imperial authority most historians consider exaggerated. Chinese state media condemned the film as historical whitewashing, while Korean cultural organizations protested its international screenings. Even in Japan, both conservative and progressive historians criticized its portrayal of Hirohito as too sympathetic. Japanese audiences responded positively, making it a modest box office success with $15 million despite its 3-hour runtime. Actor Masahiro Motoki's nuanced performance as the Emperor won awards despite the political controversy. Director Harada defended his approach. We've either deified or demonized Hirohito without seeing his human complexity. Both extremes prevent understanding. Historian Herbert Bix, Pulitzer-winning Hirohito biographer, criticized, "This film continues Japan's post-war project of separating the emperor from responsibility for a war conducted in his name, a fiction necessary for American occupation policy, but historically indefensible." Number 4. Black Rain, 1989. Shohei Imamura created the most harrowing depiction of atomic bomb aftermath ever filmed, following Hibakusha bombing survivors, struggling with radiation sickness and social discrimination. Based on Masuji Ibusa's novel, it follows Yasuko, who was exposed to Hiroshima's Black Rain, radioactive fallout, and now faces rejection from potential husbands and gradual physical deterioration despite showing no immediate injuries. What made international audiences uncomfortable was the film's unflinching portrayal of American weapons' long-term humanitarian consequences without contextualizing Japan's aggression that preceded it. The film's most devastating sequence shows bombing survivors with skin hanging off their bodies, wandering through Hiroshima's ruins, while American occupation forces later treat them as scientific specimens. American critics called it one-sided, while Japanese conservatives criticized it for dwelling on victimhood. The film won the technical grand prize at Cannes, despite diplomatic pressure to exclude it from competition. Shot in stark black and white, when color-dominated cinema, its documentary aesthetic amplified its horrific imagery. Actress Yoshiko Tanaka interviewed actual Hibakusha to prepare for her role, later becoming an anti-nuclear activist. Director Imamura, responding to criticism of showing Japanese as victims, stated, "A nation can be both aggressor and victim." Recognizing the suffering caused by atomic weapons doesn't erase Japan's responsibility for the war, but denying either truth prevents reconciliation. The film remains banned in several Asian countries that suffered Japanese occupation despite its anti-war message. Number 3. The Pacific War, 1968. Satsuo Yamamoto's sprawling 4-hour propaganda epic triggered international diplomatic incidents by portraying Japan's invasions as defensive liberation of Asia from white colonialism. Covering the entire war, from Marco Polo Bridge to surrender, the film depicts Japanese soldiers as reluctant warriors forced to fight by American oil embargoes while helping grateful Asian populations overthrow European masters. A narrative most historians consider fantasy. The most outrageously revisionist scene shows Japanese troops welcomed as liberators in the Philippines, directly contradicting documented atrocities. China severed cultural exchanges with Japan following the film's release, while the Philippines formally protested its factual distortions. American theaters refused distribution despite its technical accomplishments, calling it dangerous historical fiction. Japanese critics split along ideological lines, with nationalists praising its balanced portrayal, while progressives condemned its shameless distortions. The production received quiet government support through preferential location access to self-defense force bases despite constitutional prohibitions on military involvement in war glorification. Director Yamato, previously known for leftist films, shocked colleagues with his nationalist turn. Historian Saburo Ienaga noted, "This film represents the reassertion of unapologetic nationalism in Japan as economic success bred new confidence." Its international reception demonstrated the vast gap between how Japan wished to remember the war and how its former victims experienced it. Number 2. The Burmese Harp, 1956. Kon Ichikawa's lyrical masterpiece about a Japanese soldier becoming a Buddhist monk after witnessing war's horrors became a surprise international flashpoint for what it too didn't show. Set during Japan's retreat from Burma, it follows Private Mizushima's spiritual awakening as he stays behind to bury war dead instead of returning to Japan, a bury war dead in times, poetic meditation on individual redemption that completely omits Japanese atrocities in occupied territories. The film's most glaring omission is any reference to the Burma Railway, Death Railway, where Japanese forces worked over 100,000 Allied prisoners and Asian laborers to death. When screened in former occupied territories, audiences protested what they considered selective amnesia about Japan's brutal colonization. British and Australian veterans groups called it moral blindness disguised as humanism. Critics worldwide praised its artistic brilliance while acknowledging its historical limitations. The film won the San Giorgio Prize at Venice, launching Japanese cinema internationally. Lead actor Shoji Yasui studied Buddhist texts for months, despite having minimal dialogue. Director Ichikawa, confronted about omitting war crimes, responded, "I made a film about one man's spiritual journey, not a historical document." Thai film scholar Anchali Chaiwaraporn countered, "The film's beauty makes it more dangerous. By focusing on Japanese suffering while erasing Asian victims, it creates a false moral equivalence between aggressor and victim that remains Japan's preferred war narrative." Number 1. Grave of the Fireflies, 1988. Isao Takahata created the most devastating anti-war statement ever animated by following orphaned siblings Seita and Setsuko as they slowly starved to death during American animated by Setsuko firebombing campaigns. Based on Akiyuki Nosaka's semi-autobiographical novel, this Studio Ghibli masterpiece shows civilian suffering in unflinching detail, while completely avoiding discussion of why Japan was being bombed, a framing that sparked intense international debate about war responsibility. The film's most controversial aspect is its exclusive focus on Japanese victimhood, without acknowledging Japan's aggression that preceded Allied bombing. American critics praised its artistic power, while noting it shows Japanese civilians as innocent victims of seemingly unprovoked American violence. Chinese and Korean commentators called it selective empathy that ignores millions of Asian civilian deaths caused by Japanese forces. Animation experts universally recognize it as a technical masterpiece despite political disagreements. The film initially failed commercially in Japan, paired bizarrely with the cheerful My Neighbor Totoro as a double feature. Director Takahata insisted it wasn't anti-American but anti-war, saying, "Showing children suffering questions all justifications for combat, regardless of who's fighting." Film theorist Susan Napier noted, "This film encapsulates Japan's complex war memory, simultaneously acknowledging tremendous suffering, while separating that suffering from questions of national responsibility, a selective remembering that continues to complicate Japan's relations with former enemies and victims alike. These films didn't just shock viewers, they shaped how entire nations remember history's deadliest conflict. Which one surprised you most with its controversial take? Should Japanese filmmakers focus more on acknowledging war crimes? Or is it unfair to expect them to constantly apologize for previous generations? The uncomfortable question remains: if American directors can make heroic World War II films without addressing Hiroshima or Vietnam, why do we demand Japanese cinema constantly confront its imperial past? Share your thoughts below. This debate is far from over.